Hi, my name is Vasilis Grigoriadis and I'm going to present a joint work with Panos FOUSEKIS and Dimitrios Panagiotou entitled Price Linkages among Soybean, Palm and Canola Oils, a TVP VAR analysis. Let me start with why vegetable oils matter globally. Three oils basically dominate this market: soybean, palm and canola, also known as rapeseed oil. Together, they account for about 4/5 of global production, so whatever happens in these markets has system-wide effects. What's also important is how tradable they are. Around 40% of production is traded internationally, and palm oil is the big one here. It makes up more than half of global vegetable oil exports. On the demand side, most vegetable oil is used in the food system. About half goes into food and food preparation. So prices feed directly into food costs. This slide we are summarizing what we are trying to do. First, we look at the price relationship, specifically the connectedness across different vegetable oil markets. We want to see if stocks in one market show up in the others and how strong is that link. Then, more specifically, we focus on two things: the degree of connectedness, how big the spillovers are, and the direction, who tends to transmit shocks and who mainly receives them. Finally, we are interested in the fact that these relationships aren't constant, so we track their dynamic evolution over time, and we also break connectedness down into short run versus long run effects, basically 1 to 3 months versus more than 3 months. Because major vegetable oils are close substitutes, their prices often move together. A lot research has looked at how strong these linkages are. For example, Azam et al. Use monthly global prices and wavelet methods, and they find strong co-movement that tends to be stronger at longer horizons, with soybean oil often playing a leading role. Finn and Nolly take a time series approach with a vacuum on monthly data and find integration among soybean, palm, and rapeseed oils. Their impulse responses and variance decompositions also suggest soybean has the strongest influence on the others. More recently, Fousekis looks at palm and soybean oil futures with quantile coherency and finds moderate but clearly asymmetric dependence. Prices here are more likely to crash together than boom together. Here is the method. The idea is to measure spillovers in a way that's both dynamic and specific. So instead of one single connectedness number, we separate what happens in the short run, about 1 to 3 months, from what happens in the long run, beyond 3 months. A key advantage that we don't need, a key advantage that here is that we don't need rolling windows. With rolling window bars, you have to pick a window size, you lose observations, and the results can be sensitive to outliers. The TVP VAR approach avoids that by letting the parameters evolve smoothly over time. In terms of workflow, we estimate a TVP VAR, rewrite it in its moving average form, compute the generalized forecast error variance decomposition, and then decompose that into frequency bands. From there, we build the standard connectedness indices like to, from, net, and the overall TCI, both in aggregate and separately for short and long run horizons. This slide, I'm just defining the connectedness measures we use. Everything starts from the variance decomposition search theta, which tell us how much shocks from market J contribute to the forecast error variance of market I at time t for a given frequency band d and horizon h. From there, we build a few standard summary indicators. The net pairwise direction connectedness (NPDC) simply compares the spillovers in both directions between two markets. So it tells us who dominates within a pair. Then we have to and from. To sums how much market I transmits to all the others, while from sums how much market I receives from the others. The net measure is just 2 minus from, so positive values means the market is a net transmitter, and negative values mean it's a net receiver. Finally, the TCI is the overall index, basically the average spillover in the system, and we compute it both in aggregate and separately for the short run and the long run frequency bands. Here I'm showing the data we work with. They are mostly prices from the IMF Primary Commodity Prices database from January 2005 to May 2025 for soybean, palm, and canola oil. The figure plots the series in logarithms. The main takeaway is that the three markets move quite closely together. You see clear movement over most of the sample. There are also a couple big common episodes, short run and correlation around the 2007-9 period, and then another sharp upswing during 2020 to 2022, followed by some easing afterward. Here I'm showing the full sample connectedness table with p-values in parentheses. The first thing to notice here is the diagonal. In each market, more than half of the variation is explained by its own shocks. For example, palm oil has about 58% self-connectedness. So idiosyncratic factors still matter a lot. At the same time, the off diagonal elements show meaningful cross market spillovers, giving an overall TCI of about 43%, which I intercept as moderate integration. The strongest bilateral spillover runs from soybean to palm. Almost 29.5% of palm's forecast error variance is explained by soybean shocks, while the weakest is from canola to palm, around 12%. Looking at the directional measures, the markets receive fairly similar amount from the rest of the system. But in terms of transmitting shocks, soybean and palm are the main contributors. Uh, in net terms, the soybean is statistically significant net transmitter. Canola is a significant net receiver, and palm's net value is positive but not statistically robust. Here we decompose connectedness into two frequency bands, the short run, 1 to 3 months, shown in the top table, and the long run, beyond 3 months, shown in the bottom table. The first message is that overall connectedness is very balanced across horizons. The total connectedness index is about 22.3% in the short run and 20.7% in the long run. So both short and long horizon spillovers matter for price transmission in these markets. The second message is about direction. Canola clearly stands out in the long run. It's a statistically significant net receiver with a net value around minus 10.8%, which suggests that more persistent shocks from soybean and palm tend to accumulate in the canola market over time. Finally, in the short-run band, the net measures are generally not statistically significant, so the evidence on who leads and who follows is much weaker at short horizons. Here I'm plotting the dynamic total connectedness index, the TCI. The black area is the overall, and the color there is so how it splits into short run spillovers and long run spillovers. The main message is that connectedness is clearly time varying. It reaches a major peak around 2009, then stays relatively high and stable through roughly 2017. After that, it trends down until 2020, and then we see another sharp rise that lasts for about 2 years before it declines again toward the end of the summer. These peaks line up quite well with major stress episodes, the 2007-8 global food price crisis, and then the COVID period, together with Russia-Ukraine war, suggesting that systemic shocks strengthen price transmission across vegetable oil markets. In terms of the frequency breakdown, the long-run component dominates for most of the 2007 to 2016 period. After that, the short-run component becomes relatively more important. Overall, the difference between the two paths isn't huge, except early in the sample where connectedness is mainly driven by short-run spillovers. Here you can see the directional spillovers for each market. So anything above zero means that market is a net transmitter of shocks to the rest of the system. And anything below zero means it's a net receiver. The black line is the total net measure, and the colored so again how it splits into short run and long run components. Starting with soybean oil, after about 2008, it's mostly above zero. So it behaves as a net transmitter. Up to around 2020, it is mainly driven by the long run component, while after 2020, the short run component becomes relatively more important. Canola looks very different. It's below zero basically throughout the whole sample, meaning it's consistently a net receiver. And that receiving role is mainly long run, suggesting that more persistent shocks from the other markets tend to show up in canola over time. Palm oil is the mixed case. In the long run band, it tends to transmit shocks, but in the short run band, it tends to receive them. Because the long run component dominates in the total measure, palm ends up being slightly a net transmitter overall. Finally, just like the TCI, net spillovers are strong in before to 2010 and then ease with visible upticks again around 2020 and 2023, especially for canola and palm. Here I'm looking at the net pairwise connectedness, again split into total short run and long run components. Starting with soybean versus palm, in the short run component up to around 2010, soybean tends to sit below zero, so it's mainly receiving shocks from palm. After 2010, that flips and soybean becomes a net transmitter in the short run. In the long run, the pattern is less stable. It often stays positive, but there are periods where it weakens or briefly reserves. For the palm canola pair, the message that palm transmits the canola mainly through the long run, while in the short run band, it tends to be the receiver. Since the long run component is larger, larger overall, the aggregate effect is that palm is a net transmitter to canola. Finally, for soybean canola, the values are mostly positive in both short and long run horizons, so soybean is consistently transmitting shocks to canola. And just like earlier figures, you see the biggest spikes around 2010 and then again around 2020 and 2023, especially for the pairs involving canola. To wrap up, the big picture is that these three vegetable oil markets are moderately integrated, but the strength of the linkages clearly changes over time. The overall connectedness is about 43% at it jumps during major stress episodes. In terms of direction, soybean oil comes out as the key transmitter of shocks, while canola is the main receiver, which fits quite well with earlier work that highlights soybeans' leading role in the vegetable oil complex. When we split spillovers by horizon, short run and long run connectedness are roughly equally important overall, but the canola story is mainly a long run. It absorbs more persistent shocks coming from soybean um, and sometimes palm over time. Finally, the timing is informative. Connectedness peaks around 2009 and then rises again during 2020 and 2022 and in 2023, which lines up with the idea that dependence strengthens in turbulent periods, similar to what we see in futures-based and high-frequency studies. Just to close with the broader implications, the main takeaway is that shocks in the vegetable oil complex don't stay isolated. They can spread across oils and across horizons, which can increase food price pressures and food security concerns. And we see that clearly in stress periods like 2009, 2020, 2022, and again in 2023. A practical point is that soybean and palm tend to be main sources of spillovers, while canola is more of a systematic receiver, especially at longer horizons. So, monitoring the leading markets, especially soybean and palm, can give an early signal and broader price stress is building. This is relevant for policy, for government and authorities. It helps anticipate pass-through into retail edible oils and processed foods, and for import dependent countries or food aid agencies, it helps plan purchasing decisions and inventory management. Finally, there are some limitations. We focus on three benchmark series and monthly data, and the framework is reduced form, so we can't pin down specific structural channels like biofuel policy, weather, logistics, or exchange rates. Future work could expand the system to more oils and regions, separate spot and futures benchmarks more explicitly, use higher frequency data, and bring in external drivers in a structural or regime switching setup. Thanks for your attention. If you'd like more details or you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out. My mail is on the screen.